Today, we'll be sharing results and products from the GEMS project, which is a collaboration between the Heart Research Institute at Texas A&M, the Nicholas Institute at Duke University, the Nature Conservancy, and the Bridge Collaborative. Next slide, please. So I'm Lydia Olander, and I am from Duke University. And the other leads from the GEMS project are David Yaskowitz at the Heart Research Institute, Chris Shepard at the Nature Conservancy, and Heather Tallis from the Bridge Collaborative. Later today, you'll also hear from Christine Hale at the Heart Research Institute, and you'll meet some of our other team members in the breakout group discussions that will happen at the end of today's discussion. Next slide, please. The motivation for this work started with the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico just over 11 years ago. A series of National Academies of Science reports in the years after the spill emphasized the need for measuring the social and economic impacts of both the disaster itself and the restoration efforts designed to mitigate its effects. Next slide, please. While billions of dollars have been and are being spent on Gulf Coast restoration, there is still no shared platform for assessing and reporting on the restoration progress and effectiveness for these social and economic goals that are shared by many institutions working in the region. You'll see at the bottom of the slide are goals for the Restore Council, and two of those are circled: community resilience and economic revitalization. Both of these are social and economic goals that we currently have no systematic way to assess and measure. So we hope with this project to lay the groundwork for such a shared platform for restoration program managers and funders in the Gulf of Mexico. Next slide, please. Over the past 3 years, we've created conceptual models to identify the likely social and economic outcomes of different types of restoration projects taking place in the Gulf of Mexico. For each of these outcomes, we brainstormed an initial set of social economic metrics and then refined those metrics with input from experts and practitioners. And then finally, we developed measurement protocols with details about methods and resources for measuring these social and economic metrics. And throughout this process, if you'll click, you'll see, we incorporated feedback from experts and practitioners and funders in a series of workshops, both in person and virtual over the course of the last 3 years. Next slide, please. We applied the GEMS process that I just described to a variety of different restoration approaches that are used commonly across the Gulf, including 7 different types of habitat restoration, which included a deep dive into different techniques for oyster reef restoration. Also included were projects for recreational enhancement through installing or updating recreational infrastructure like fishing piers, and improving water quality by applying green and gray techniques to stormwater and wastewater management. Next slide, please. So why would you want to consider social and economic outcomes in project planning? There are a number of reasons. First, to consider what kind of project might best serve the needs of your community. Second, to tell a more complete story about how your planned or existing project could affect the local community and economy. And third, to improve communications about your planned project with a broader group of stakeholders. You could click, please. The logic models we developed could help with this. Here's what these models look like. This slide shows one pathway in a logic model that traces how a management action, in this case, the planning of a new oyster reef in the dark purple blue box, changes outcomes for people. It shows how the ecological and biophysical changes caused by that management lead to changes in how people use or appreciate the resources. In this case, recreational harvest of fish or shellfish that tend to live around oyster reefs in the light blue box there. Then it shows how this can result in a change in social and economic outcomes, in this case, recreational fishing jobs in yellow. Perhaps there's a demand for additional guided fishing trips out to this newly restored reef. A full model for a project would show all of the different human activities and social economic outcomes that would change significantly because of this project. So if you haven't determined the type of project you want to do yet, you can look at models for different types of restoration projects and see which ones provide benefits that fit the needs of your community. And if you already have a project type selected, you could use the model to identify outcomes to talk about, or use a version of the model to show these connections to community partners. Once you have identified the set of outcomes for your project, you can then think about who in your community might care and perhaps engage them in new ways in discussion around your project. Oh, can you go back a slide? Yeah, thank you. So one more reason you might want to consider social and economic outcomes in project planning is to identify metrics that help you quantify the benefits you are providing for your community and funders. The metrics we identified in the GEMS project that are associated with specific outcomes of interest could help here. Can you click once? In this example, the metric is the number of recreational jobs created because of the project. So that's just an example of what these metrics could look like. We will talk more about metrics in our next webinar on monitoring, which will be tomorrow at the same time. Next slide. You can find all of the resources developed through the GEMS project on the GEMS website. It includes searchable database of ecosystem service logic models, these conceptual models I showed briefly before, and there's a full one shown on this slide. And they're for each project type included in the project. These models identify all the relevant social and economic outcomes. And in the next week or two, we will also provide a set of users guides for different types of restoration. There'll be one for habitat restoration, one specifically on different types of oyster reef restoration, and a third one on green infrastructure for water quality improvement. So now I'm going to turn this over to Chris Hale, who's going to take us through an example using the GEMS tools for project planning.
Hi, everyone. So for our example today, I will be referencing a real-life restoration project known as Exploration Green. This project is already well underway, and while the GEMS team did not work with the Exploration Green project, it is a good example of a green infrastructure project that results in measurable socioeconomic outcomes. In fact, we like this project so much that we also include it in one of the practitioner's guide that Lydia just mentioned. So a little bit of context for you. This project is located in Southeast Houston, and it worked with dedicated groups of volunteers to transform a defunct golf course into an innovative stormwater detention center and green space. Its goal was to provide an integrated natural solution for catastrophic seasonal flooding while also serving as a nature preserve and recreation area. This 200-acre urban green space provides the community with recreational opportunities, offering 40 acres of both wetlands and permanent detention lakes, and is home to over 1,000 native species. And you can learn more about this project at explorationgreen.org. So for today, you're going to pretend that you are a project manager of what will become Exploration Green, but you're in planning phase. Exploration Green is just a twinkle in your eye. So you and your partners are drafting a proposal to a funding institution. You are proposing a restoration project, specifically a green infrastructure project that will reduce stormwater flooding using green space. The goal is to improve water quality in the local watershed, which will benefit the environment as well as the people living in that watershed. The funders require that you be specific in your proposal about how the ecosystem restoration project that you are proposing will benefit the local community and economy, and that you measure and report those benefits. So how do you incorporate socioeconomic outcomes into your project plan? Well, you vaguely remember your boss had mentioned something about a GEMS ecosystem modeling approach and a web-based tool. She said she had joined a GEMS webinar recently and she thought it would be a useful project planning tool. So you Google it and find the GEMS tool. All right. And this is where my video is going to take over. So you land on the GEMS main page. You see some options for exploring the website, and then you see the tool models and metrics search and decide to click on that. So you want to know what the tool can offer as far as planning for green infrastructure projects. You aren't really sure what to do, but then you notice the gray box that says, I want to ... And it has some helpful hints like I want to illustrate my project's expected outcomes using a logic model. It directs you to click on search by project type, which is what you do. At the top of the page, you see you can filter by different socioeconomic outcomes and project types. You can also scroll down and see that you can view and select from the full suite of project types that the GEMS website offers. You're looking for green infrastructure, stormwater related projects. You keep scrolling, you get to water quality improvement project types. This might be what you're looking for. And there you have it, stormwater management, green infrastructure. Here you have some options. You can click on an image of a logic model. You can click on an editable version of the model, or you can click on the context document. You decide to first click here on the context document to see if it offers more information. The context document appears as a downloadable PDF, and it explains what an ecosystem service logic model is, the assumptions in the models, and it includes additional information about the relationships between the various components of the model. It also includes a list of the references used to develop the logic model and the names of experts that helped to develop it. You decide to download and save this context document as a reference for your project planning team, and you can use it in your draft of your proposal for references as well. Now you're interested in viewing the model, so you click back to the tool and you want to see the model, so you click on model image. Here you can see the full ecosystem service logic model that was developed for green infrastructure. Specifically, this model was built for a project that is adding green infrastructure components to stormwater management systems. You get excited because this sounds just like what you envisioned for Exploration Green. And the model has components that are similar to your project proposal. You plan to transform a defunct golf course into a water retention pond that captures floodwater and promotes vegetative growth. Your project also involves converting old golf cart paths into hiking and biking trails through a nature park with picnic areas. The model shows all the changes that are likely to occur due to the addition of green infrastructure, which is the intervention here on the left-hand side. In the middle are the changes to the biological and ecological systems, which are the gray boxes, which then influence how people use the project area. So those are the light blue boxes. And then the social and economic outcomes are on the right-hand side. So these are the yellow boxes. You notice that outcomes that are strongly linked to the intervention are a darker shade of yellow compared to the outcomes that are a bit weaker. Those are the lighter yellow boxes. Additionally, crucial pathways to strongly linked outcomes are indicated with bold arrows, as well as bold outlines around the intermediate components. For example, adding green infrastructure is strongly connected to aesthetics, which is then also strongly linked to green space recreation, which then results in the socioeconomic outcome of cultural values such as knowledge, sense of place, livelihood option, existence value, traditional and local knowledge, etc. This is exactly the type of outcome that you and your project team envision, and you know your boss is going to be happy when she hears that this model validates your project plan. In fact, you see there are many socioeconomic outcomes of green infrastructure that you could justify in your project proposal. Some are outcomes that you've already been talking about in your project team, such as property protection from flooding. But others are new and make you think of some additional partners you might want to invite because they will be interested in this project. So you download and save this model as a starting point for understanding how your project will result in some or most of these outcomes. You're excited to share this new information with your team, but you want to click back to the tool first. You see that you can also use that editable version of the model to make your own, but you aren't quite ready to do that yet. You do want to see what it looks like, so you click to take a quick peek. Here's the model again, but you notice at the bottom a toolbar appears. You can edit, add, delete, and when you're happy with it, it will give you an option to download and save your specific model that you created based on your ideas for your project. You click back to the tool. You want to further explore the outcomes and metrics that are associated with green infrastructure so you can start thinking about which ones you might focus on in your proposal. You notice there's a plus outcomes and a plus associated metrics associated with this project type right here on the screen already. So you go ahead and click and you see the strongly linked outcomes and the weakly linked outcomes, as well as the associated metrics at the project scale, as well as the program scale. You aren't really ready yet to dive into which metrics you want to monitor for. First, you need to discuss all this with your project team. I wonder if you can print it. Yep, right here. You can print this out and decide to do that for later. But you have a few more questions. What if you've never measured or monitored socioeconomic outcomes before? It's not like measuring salinity or counting birds and fish. Does GEMS offer socioeconomic monitoring or measurement protocols that you can adapt for your project? You go back up to your project type since you know the full list of metrics and more information can be found there. And you click on it. You scroll and click on the first metric in the metrics list, awareness. You find much more detailed information about the metrics, as well as a link to metric protocols. So you click on it. You're happy to see that you can download instructions for how to measure some of these metrics and make a mental note to visit this page later when you're ready to make a monitoring plan with your full team. So for the purposes of this webinar, that's the end of this example. We're going to go back to my slides. Okay, so I'm back in real life, and I wanted to make note that so far you've learned that as project manager in the project planning or proposal writing stage, you can use the GEMS tool to narrow in on which socioeconomic outcomes you might expect from your restoration project. We used Exploration Green as an example, but as you saw, there's many restoration project types and models available on the GEMS tool that can help you determine what outcomes you can expect from your own project. And if you join us on tomorrow's webinar, we will walk through additional examples where you will learn how to select metrics for monitoring the outcomes of your project. But one last note before we move on to questions and discussion in our breakout rooms. What if you already started your project or have already completed it, but you totally forgot to plan for inclusion of socioeconomic outcomes and metrics, but now you want to? Can you still use the GEMS approach to report out on socioeconomic outcomes? The short answer, yes. You can simply work backwards through the logic model and looking through the outcomes associated with your project type. There are several outcomes and metrics that you would likely be tracking for project management purposes anyway that you could use to report or communicate. For example, as project manager of the Exploration Green project, you would be managing its budget. So you could report out on economic activity outcomes, such as project spending that resulted from your work. Again, join us tomorrow to dive in on metrics and monitoring. So we are going to move into the questions and discussion session. Lydia, did you want to give any instructions?
Yes, I'm happy to. Thank you very much, Chris. So now we're going to have time to answer your questions you might have about the GEMS project or the tools and discuss how these might be useful for your work. So we're going to have breakouts. You'll have one or two members of our team in each of the breakout groups to be there to answer your questions and discuss this all with you. We're going to take about 15 minutes in these breakout groups, and then we'll come back together and talk about any kind of clarifying questions that might be helpful to the broader group. Okay, we have all the groups back now, Rachel?
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. So I thought we would take a moment here before we finalize everything to just see if there were any particular questions that we thought would be useful to clarify for the whole group. And I'll start with one, and then maybe we can go through and see if the other breakout groups had anything they wanted to bring back to the larger group. So the first thing is I was asked, who should people contact if they have questions as they're going through the website? And I know my email's here on the slide, but I'm wondering if in the chat we could put emails for a few of us there so that people have some people they can reach out to and contact. So Rachel, could you put some emails in there for me? Great, thank you. Did anyone else have questions or comments they wanted to bring back to the full group? Just jump in, breakout group leaders.
Yeah, out of Katie and I group that we were working with, one of the questions was around, having something to share with leadership within an agency that they're working within, or a group that they're working within, and we shared the idea of the practitioner and the funder's guides as might, that might be a way forward, but also maybe something that could be a little bit more succinct, to be able to share with individuals that they would be able to pass on to leadership to help convince them of the usefulness of this. And so that's, I think, something to flag going forward.
Great. Thanks, David. Any other items from the breakout groups? Okay. So just want to thank you all very much for joining us today and let you know that we have these upcoming webinars listed here on our slide. And we will put the links to those webinars in the chat box now, so that if you aren't yet registered and would like to, or if you'd like to share this with some of your colleagues you think would be interested, our next webinar is going to focus more on monitoring and using the website for folks who are interested in that. The one after that will be really for funders, how to use the GEMS tools and website to help with funding questions. And then after that, we have an overview webinar that's really going to be open to everyone. It's going to be general, just kind of an overview of the whole project and all of the tools at a higher level. And we'd love any feedback you have and any thoughts about how we might work together to test out some of these tools and metrics on the ground. So please feel free to email us and reach out. We'd really love to follow up and talk to you all. And I think a survey may have just been popped into the chat box. I can't see the chat box, but hopefully it is. We have a short survey we'd like you all to respond to, if you don't mind, which would just be to help us kind of follow up with you and figure out what next steps might be. All right. Anything else from the group that I forgot to mention?
Just to add, Lydia, it's on the slide, but worth saying all of these webinars will be recorded. So if you can't make the times and dates, or if you want to share with colleagues afterwards, they'll all be available through the GEMS website after this series.
Great. Thank you, Heather. All right. Well, thank you so very much for joining us today. We're going to give you 15 minutes back of your day, it looks like. Had an efficient conversation. So thank you all. And hopefully we'll see some of you tomorrow.